Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas lied about the Haitian migrants. He said that the Border Patrol agents were whipping them. You remember this photo. This took place some time ago, right after Biden took office. And the idea was these Border Patrol agents were running around on their horses, whipping these migrants as they were trying to come ashore. And we know that this photo made the waves. It was all over Twitter. It was all over the magazines, all over the Washington Post and all these. And they said, look at this racism on display in our country. How could you believe this guy? And they were just outraged about this. Jen Psaki, day in and day out, was, saying that we were all going to die because of this racism at the border, and something needed to be done. And so the story comes from let's get some background here. Yeah, so Zero Hedge had some very good background for us, and they sort of assembled this, and I wanted to run through this. Here, this was posted by Tyler Durden, who is one of the bloggers over there. Says, remember when the Biden administration fabricated a story about this Haitian migrant? This is what it looked like. This is when Biden came out.
Mr. President, you said on the campaign trail that you were going to restore the moral standing of the U.S., that you were going to immediately end Trump's assault on the dignity of immigrant communities. Given what we saw at the border this week, have you failed in that promise? And this is happening under your watch. Do you take responsibility for the chaos that's unfolding?
Of course I take responsibility. I'm president, but
he didn't, obviously.
As you saw. To see people treated like they did, horses barely running them over, people being strapped.
What?
It's outrageous. I promise you, those people will pay.
Okay.
There will be an investigation underway now, and there will be consequences.
All right. So he gave that speech, and we all know that that was a big fat lie. We covered it back then, but it got a dog pile from all the usual suspects in the media. AOC said the same thing. Said, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. Our immigration system is designed for cruelty and the dehumanization of immigrants. Immigration should not be a crime. And she was commenting on all of these alleged whips. Bill Melugin shared this footage from Sarah Blake Morgan when this entire saga broke. It says, sorting through my footage from the border, I was in the river during the critical incident that happened. It's shaky, but here's what I captured. And of course, this details an entirely different story. You can see the original video shows the Border Patrol agents not whipping the Haitian migrants, but controlling their horses during this broken, catastrophic border invasion. All of it was totally fake. But they took that narrative and they ran with it. And we talked about it for a long, long time here. Now we see this guy, this is the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. Several lawsuits have been going on. There was a September 24th, 2021 email that came out. It was obtained by the Heritage Foundation through a FOIA request, which is a Freedom of Information Act request. And they say that it shines the light on exactly what happened. Now, the investigation is ongoing. Joe Biden came out and he said all of those individuals are going to be brought to justice, or they're going to pay. There will be consequences. We just heard him say that. And now the investigation is ongoing more than a year later. But findings came out from the Office of Professional Responsibility in July, and they said that they found that no whips were in their possession and no migrant was struck by the reins. Although they did say that there were some other problems with this. But just hours after Biden made that remark to the cameras, somebody named Marcia Espinoza, who was the assistant secretary over there at the Department of Homeland Security, they emailed Mayorkas and other DHS leadership, and they alerted them to a news article that showed that the photographer who took the images did not see any whipping, the person who actually was there. People like Mayorkas, they came out and they said, our nation saw horrifying images that do not reflect who we are, right? The Department of Homeland Security, he sort of runs all of this stuff, says, we know that those images painfully conjured up the worst elements of our nation's ongoing battle against systemic racism. Mayorkas said at a press conference 2.5 hours after he was notified about the email. Senator Tom Cotton is commenting about this on Twitter. He said that Mayorkas knew that the smears against the agent were a lie, yet he still threw them under the bus. Where is your integrity? And Bill Melugin got his hands on the email. And it's important where this email came from. And so let's make sure that we hit that before we actually jump into this. The email came from a Freedom of Information Act request from the Heritage Foundation. And they finally got this email through the discovery process. And so let's take a look at this email in full. This is the email that went to Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, the guy who runs the Department of Homeland Security. Should know exactly what's going on, especially with Border Patrol and all of the agents who were allegedly involved in a racist attack against the immigrants by whipping them as they came ashore. You can see the email came from Marcia Espinoza, also worked for the government. It went to the secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. Copied on this was Jennifer Higgins, Jeffrey Resmanovich, and Isabella Ulola. And the subject that came out September 24th at 12:05 in 2021 says, forward from KTSM. Photographer behind the controversial photos speaks exclusively to our news agency. They say, highlighted out of El Paso, Texas, in bright yellow ink, they write, the photographer behind the images depicting the Border Patrol agents on horseback told KTSM things are not exactly what they seem when it comes to the photos. You're kidding. The photographs, which were taken on Sunday, appear to show agents on horses with a whip in hand. The photos caused outrage because from certain angles, it appears to show the Border Patrol agents whipping the migrants, but the photographer, Paul Rajay, said he and his colleagues never saw agents whipping anyone. And of course, this came out at 12:05, before Mayorkas went out and started running his mouth about the racist Border Patrol agents that he's in charge of. Some of the Haitian men started running, trying to get around the horses, said the photographer. Photographer is based out of Las Cruces and has been in Del Rio since Friday. He took photographs from the Mexican side. The photographer said, quote, I've never seen them whip anyone. He was swinging it, but it can be misconstrued when you're looking at the picture, right? It's a lariat for his horse. That's what he was doing. The photos drew immense criticism from many on social media, and the White House said it's going to investigate. That's what we heard from Biden. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki called the images horrific. And Vice President Kamala, she was also asked about the photos, and she said those are deeply troubling. She said there's a thorough investigation into how the agents are treating the migrants. Right now, all of this went over to the Department of Homeland Security. You can see it's even got the serial number down there at the bottom. And that means it landed on Mayorkas' desk, and he still went out there and talked about what a tragedy this was. They say that it clearly shows that they're willing to lie to the American people for their self-interest, and that better men don't do those things, and they step down. So it feels pretty inappropriate for the U.S. government to be blaming their own agencies for being racist when they're not being racist in order to escape liability for their failures at the border, right? That's what all of this was about. They didn't care about migrants being whipped. They don't care about the migrants at all. They care about politics. They care about getting people in and being able to use them for their political advantage. Their safety, their sanctity, all that stuff, they don't care about any of that. They care about the politics of it. This photograph gave them a perfect opportunity to shift the conversation away from their failures at the border, the fact that there are throngs of Haitian migrants and others coming across the border on a daily basis. Forgot all about that. They instead want to talk about the racist Border Patrol agents, because that way they don't have to talk about their own failures. So it's a pretty interesting dynamic when you have the government criticizing itself for being so racist, and the people who are in charge of it are investigating non-crimes or non-issues at the highest levels. But it's worse than that. They're actually lying about the stories, trying to shove it down our throats to make us all believe it. ICE, meanwhile, Immigration Customs Enforcement, they're spending $90 million a year, apparently, on cell phones for migrants who do come across. The story comes over from the Epoch Times, and you can see here they tell us that ICE issues smartphones to 252,000 illegal border crossers, that total coming out to $89.5 million. They write that U.S. Department of Homeland Security agencies issued more than 255,000 smartphones to illegal aliens during 2022. The data came over from ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, their own website. The phones are trackable, and the individuals responsible for checking in with ICE on a regular basis, and they've got to send geotagged photos of themselves. The cost for those phones and their accompanying technology is $250,000 per day. Per day. Per day. That's 90 million bucks. Now, the majority of the phones were issued to single adults. ICE has failed to provide any data on the compliance rate of the smartphone program or how many aliens have absconded from it. ICE began issuing the smartphones within the past year as border stations became overwhelmed. Some bureaucrat somewhere who is unelected just said, why don't we just spend a bunch of money and give them a bunch of cell phones? That way we can make sure that they show back up when they need to be here. ATD is an alternatives to detention program, which acts as a workaround for the legal requirement to detain the migrants. So they just have a little escape hatch. Well, we'll just give them a phone, they'll come back. By law, they say that parole is supposed to be used on a case-by-case basis for urgent issues, but the status allows them to use these mechanisms to escape and navigate around the laws. In addition to the smartphones, 41,000 additional illegal aliens in fiscal 2022, which ended September 30th, were fitted with ankle monitors, and another 20,000 were placed in alternative detention programs. And so there's a lot going on at the border. ICE did release some pretty interesting numbers, and they came out in spreadsheet format, so we can take a quick look at these. If you go over to the U.S. government website, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, you can see they have a big list of materials that they put out there to tell you what a great job they're doing, even though we all know they're doing a horrible job at everything. But they did post some interesting statistics about fiscal year 2022. These are the detention numbers that they have for us in Excel format. And so let's take a look at what we have here. Let's see if we can get the colors adjusted for us here. The U.S. Customs and Border Enforcement Agency, ICE, they came out and they released these statistics. They made them available for us. And if you are an Excel guru, you're going to see all sorts of tabs here at the bottom of these documents. We have some details on fiscal year 2022. Let's sort of zoom in and pull some of these up. They tell us that we've got some pretty expensive costs. Daily tech costs, for example, of GPS is about $112,000 a day for GPS records. And this is for all of the technology, ATD active population counts, 40,000 people on GPS, that cost $100,000 a day. SmartLink, 255,000 people on those, that's $245,000 per day. Voice ID, that's cheap. Daily, just $3,500 a day, no problem. Only 19,000 people are on that one. No technology, good, they're not paying for that. Daily tech cost for no technology, that's great. They're not paying for that. I would expect to see sort of a big fat, probably no technology, probably $1,000 a day, something like that, because it's the government. So you see the status, right, and all sorts of stuff. Atlanta, you can see the people who are there. They break it down by Baltimore, Boston, Buffalo, Chicago, Dallas, Detroit, El Paso, LA, Miami, right, and the list goes on and on. We also have some detention numbers. These are always interesting because you can see sort of the spectrum of what is going on. So ICE detention data, we have people who've got expedited removal orders, so about 11,000 expedited removals. ICE currently detained and criminality by arresting agency. All right, so how many of these are convicted criminals here? We've got currently detained by criminality, total of 7,609 people. ICE has some, CPB has some. Total looks like between the two agencies, ICE only had 7,000. CPB had another 17,000. So in their currently detained bucket, they've got 25,000 people there. Pretty significant. Initial bookings by facility type, 300,000 here in fiscal year 2022. They have different releases. So we have, this is the number, ICE final releases by release reason, month, and criminality. So it looks like this row is a pretty interesting row. So these are going to be convicted criminals that have been bonded out. So this is sort of a very interesting couple lines here. Convicted criminals or pending criminal charges or other immigration violators that have bonded out, that have left, that have been able to sort of get out of custody. We take a look, October, We had 1,000 here. We had 1,000 here. Actually, these are much higher. So 21. Let's go to the very end and see what the numbers are. Oh, 246,000 total. 246,000 people for that year are in this category of ICE final releases by release reason, month, and criminality. Total it all up, 246,000 people released. Well, okay. So, I'm not going to sit here and go through spreadsheets all day. Obviously, that's one of the worst ways to do a show. But that's a pretty serious number. 246,000. Yeah. Released, bonded out. Criminal charges, bonded out, released. By their own numbers, right? I didn't put these spreadsheets together. So you can take a look if you really want to dive into those numbers. They've got trans detainees. We have trans detainees. They're keeping track of the ICE transgender detainee population, in case you were concerned about this. I know that 246,000 criminals is like whatever. The real question is how many transgender migrants have come across the border. And obviously we can see that here. ICE transgender detainee population, total bookings, 124. 124 total. So, not that many. I mean, relative to 246,000 of the criminal population, sort of, booked in. So New Orleans coming on top with the most trans people, migrants coming across. Phoenix is middle of the list with 2. El Paso has 1. They say data are based on individuals' self-identification as transgender, and they're subject to change daily, depending on the number of individuals booked in and out of ICE custody. So, good news. So they're keeping good track of the trans detainees. Hopefully, they're being, accommodated or whatever. All right. So those are the details on ICE, customs, immigration, enforcement. Very important business going on over there. And you can see how competent the administration really is. And now, it's not just ICE and cell phones. The U.S. Department of Treasury is now also investigating the busing migrant saga. You can see this letter went out on October 7th from the U.S. Department of Treasury, being sent over to Florida, drafted on October 7, 2022 from the Department of Treasury out of Washington, D.C. This is going to several individuals, including senators and people who are in the House of Representatives, including Representative Keating, Auchincloss, Senator Markey, Tran, McGovern, and others, like Ayanna Pressley, got a copy of this letter from the United States Department of Treasury. It says, "Dear Senators and Representatives, I'm from the Treasury Department, and I got your call. I know how angry you are over the busing saga." And they say, "I am further responding to your September 19th letter requesting the Treasury Office of the Inspector General to investigate whether the state of Florida has improperly used funds obtained or derived from the state recovery funds to transport people over to Massachusetts." So what this means is all of these people, these elected politicians, they sent a letter over to the Treasury Department and they said, "We're very angry that Ron DeSantis did these things, and so we demand action." The U.S. Department of Treasury said, "Perfect. We love investigating spreadsheets and overdue library books, and that's what we do now is when we're investigating our political opponents. We go back through all of the potential process crimes that we could ever find, and we find something that we can use." And so they're doing that. The Department of Treasury is saying, "Perfect. We're on it." Treasury says, as part of its oversight responsibilities, the Treasury has audit work planned on recipients' compliance with eligible use guidance. They're saying, we're going to audit them. All right, don't worry about it. We're coming in hot. In addition, as part of our oversight work and the Coronavirus Relief Fund established by the CARES Act, we've already sought information from Florida about the appropriate use of that fund. According and regarding these issues, we are seeking from its program officials a detailed analysis of the guidance they've issued, and we're going to review this for the allowability of the use of funds related to immigration. They're going to say that these funds were earmarked for these purposes and you use them for other purposes. Therefore, you are illegally using funds and you're going to go to jail. And we're going to specifically confirm whether interest earned on those funds was utilized by Florida related to immigration activities, and if so, what conditions and limitations apply to such use. We plan to get this work underway as quickly as possible, consistent with our other oversight mandates and priorities, because we've got a lot of work to do, pandemic recovery programs and other Treasury programs and so on. We are also monitoring legislative and judicial challenges to the use of the funds for this purpose, and that might affect our review. Please contact me. I am named Richard over at the Inspector General's office. I'm the Deputy Inspector General. And so, yes, Democrat representatives and senators, I got your message. I know how badly you want to go after DeSantis and Florida, and I'm on the case. You can trust me. And they're on it. So that, my friends, is what's happening with the border and immigration. And I saw that the white mind map is bleeding your eyeballs out, and I can relate to that. So we'll flip that back on. But that, my friends, is it for the border update on the first segment. Mayorkas lying to America about what happened and doing it for political expediency, not out of any semblance of honesty or integrity or leadership, just because that was the political narrative that was going to be most effective when America was watching the border collapse. They said, well, let's just make this about racism now. And they did. But that, my friends, is the segment on that one. Thank you for subscribing to our channel on Rumble and joining us over on Locals.